So, I thought I would do a video on borderline personality disorder. I haven't done a video on borderline personality disorder, also known as BPD, and the people who are afflicted with that are known as borderlines. I haven't done videos on this before, but I do write a lot about it on Quora. Um, but instead of going through all the aspects of it, I just wanted to touch on a few aspects, a few traits of these individuals that I think are relevant and interesting. So if you were to ask me, what are some of the most visible, pronounced traits of somebody with borderline personality disorder? And let's say this person is not self-aware, so it's not like they're trying to fix their behaviors. I'd say your typical borderline has very poor impulse control. So they act off the back of their impulses a lot. And they have extreme fear of abandonment. So they don't like the feeling of being abandoned. So those two traits, amongst many others, of course, are some of the most visible and pronounced traits in somebody with borderline personality disorder who's unaware of the disorder and doesn't know how to mitigate, the behaviors and thought processes, etc. But more generally, as with the other cluster Bs, people with borderline personality disorder, they struggle to regulate their emotions internally. They're prone to having these dramatic mood swings. So you do kind of get the notion that somebody with BPD, you kind of sense the instability in them when you're interacting with them. They're kind of like a loose cannon where at any moment they might just kind of burst or explode. It's like putting Mentos in a Coca-Cola bottle and then shutting the cap. It's just like, okay, there's a lot of pressure building up. Is it going to explode? Do I want to unscrew the cap? Do I want to be near the Coca-Cola bottle when I unscrew the cap? Because you don't know what's going to burst into your face. That's kind of like somebody with BPD most of the time. They just kind of like they reach that point where they might just need to let that steam come out, but in with a lot of intensity. So unlike narcissists, I talk a lot about that. They can come across as very sadistic, very calculating, very manipulating. Borderlines tend to be less calculating, less manipulating, but they're very strongly driven by this internal instability and things like internal fear of abandonment. But at the same time that they fear abandonment, they fear engulfment. So they kind of like they can swing both ways of wanting your attention to pushing you away. That that intensity, that instability can be very difficult for their partners or people who interact with them to bear. But I just wanted to draw that distinction with people with borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, which is that, in my view, borderlines tend not to be as calculating and and sadistic, kind of in a more measured way to harm people, whereas borderlines don't really go out with the intent to harm you, but they sometimes they can harm you even more than narcissists just because they struggle to contain themselves. But if you were to meet somebody with borderline personality disorder and this person liked you, and let's say the person really liked you, they saw you as a really good friend, maybe even a favorite person, somebody who they really look up to, respect, or maybe they're considering forming some type of romantic relationship with you, they can come on quite strong with this initial idealization, love bombing, and it can be very good. And borderlines are very good, as narcissists are. They're very good at mirroring back at you your positive traits, and they're very good at telling you what you want to know. And that's something that people across the whole cluster B spectrum are quite good at. They're good at reading you and kind of telling you what you want to hear and telling you what you want to know. So borderlines are no different. They have that about themselves. But once they've captivated you and you're captivated by them, you build each other up a lot. It's always a matter of time before you do something to disappoint the borderline, because they can't live in their idealized version of you forever. At some point, they're going to start seeing you're just a human being, and then they stop. The intensity of the love bombing, it dies down. And often at that point is where they start to devalue you and then kind of push you away a little bit. But they like to test you a lot. Borderlines like to test you. Because at the end of the day, even that, when they're idealizing you or not, at the end of the day, they want to know if you love them or not. So borderlines are constantly testing your love for them. And once the hype of the idealization fades, and you kind of get that kind of push-pull where they want to see how much you will chase them, how much you will indirectly or directly confess your love to them. They tend to push you away a lot. They tend to frame situations, which mean you have to chase them. And if you do chase them, then they get the high, they feel good, that they feel validated, and they feel loved. But once you do that, they kind of, once they pull you back in and they've had the validation from the chase, they tend to push you away again, because borderlines reach a point where they want you to love them, they want you to pursue them, but they give less and less back. And it becomes ever more easy for you to trigger their fear of engulfment, in a sense that they don't want too much of you, but they want your validation. I'm not going to go into too much detail of how that kind of push-pull cycle can play out in many ways, but essentially what you have is, after the initial idealization, they devalue you a lot. But their devaluation comes from this perspective of wanting to get you to chase them and wanting to get you to kind of show your devotion and love to them, to make them feel good about themselves. But at that point, no matter how much you can show, how much you try to show your love and devotion, doesn't matter how much you try, you'll never get them to be in a kind of stable place with you, because they're unstable by nature. And usually at some point, when the target realizes that this just isn't healthy, relationships with borderlines tend to fall apart one way or another. And I might do future videos on how kind of the discard and the end of the relationship might look. But just for the purpose of this video, I just wanted to highlight a few key traits of borderlines, which is they're kind of like poor impulse control, where they act off the back of these inner wounds, where they fear abandonment, they fear engulfment as well, and they tend to kind of act off the back of that. They tend to idealize you very much at the beginning, because that kind of distracts them from their own inner turmoil. But then once that goes away, once they see you're just a human, the devaluation sets in quite heavily, where they try to get you to confess or show your love, devotion to them, to kind of make them feel good again. And it's just kind of this process that, there's lots of limbs to it, but it's quite unique with the borderline. There's some parallels between borderlines and narcissists, but there are also some differences that are quite interesting. But I guess a commonality is just this, dramatic mood swings, this inability to regulate their emotions internally. And I want to keep this video short, so I'm going to stop here. But I will do more videos on borderline personality disorder and on different aspects of that.